Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dr. Kali Namdar from OHEL, and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar, Reimagining Moving to Florida, What You Should Know. You're in for a really wonderful webinar with a group of really fantastic presenters. I'm filling in tonight for Bracha Rapp, the OHEL South Florida Trauma Coordinator, who is unfortunately unavailable to be here tonight. Bracha really put this whole presentation together, and it's really a credit to her dedication and her wonderful work in bringing services that are so needed to the Florida community. So I'll first begin by telling you a little bit about OHEL's work in South Florida. At the moment, we have a team of mental health professionals in South Florida that provide support to anyone impacted by a sudden loss or trauma free of charge. And I'm happy to acknowledge that we have David Brescher here with us tonight from the OHEL Brescher Family South Florida Trauma Services that really responds throughout Florida to situations that involve trauma, crisis, and other catastrophes that can upend a family, school, or community. All of the life-changing work this past year and a half has been made possible by David Brescher, who does so much for the Florida community, including setting aside time from his busy schedule to be a panelist on this webinar tonight. Now, the goal of tonight's webinar is really, when making such a monumental decision to make the move to Florida, we recognize that there's such a big social emotional component, and there are financial aspects of the move that need to be considered as well as so many educational decisions that parents have to make and other considerations that come into play. Tonight, we're going to touch the surface a little, and we might not have the time to go into depth, but at least we're going to explore some key areas and offer to bring awareness and support and really help guide you as to think about what are some of the questions that you might want to consider when making the move. Throughout tonight's webinar, please feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A box. And if we don't have a chance to answer all your questions, you're welcome to email, and we're going to put the email in the chat, bracharap@ohelfamily.org. And we can always forward the appropriate questions to the panelist and try to circle back with you. Now, tonight's presentation, we're not here to try to convince you to move or not to move down to South Florida, but we want to help you consider what are some of the factors that you might want to consider when making this decision. Now, since opening in Florida about a year and a half ago, we actually began working with a number of South Florida schools and providing support through our social emotional learning resources. And we were hearing about all kinds of questions and areas of support that schools and families needed. So we thought we'd get this great panel together for you tonight. And I'm going to read you their bios. You're going to hear from a really wonderful group again. They're going to speak for a few minutes about their area of expertise, and then feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll direct the questions to the appropriate panelist. So I'm going to begin first by introducing, I'm going to read you the bio of David Brescher, who is the president of Camp Kaylee and an OHEL board member, and the founder and CEO of FM Home Loans and Sheridan Capital. David is one of the finance industry's most distinguished and accomplished leaders. David is known for his professionalism, expertise, and leadership, and maintains a stellar reputation among both industry professionals, clients, and company employees. In his 30-plus years in the mortgage industry, David has steered through various market shifts and industry changes and has always successfully maintained the company's level of service to its clientele. Most notably, through David's efforts and ability to assess risk, his company is one of the few that survived the Great Recession of 2008 and has thrived ever since. David spends much of his spare time involved in helping others through his involvement with a number of charitable causes. Next, we're going to hear from Malka Kaunat Rhodes. who is a longtime professional in the field of special education with over 10 years of experience working in a large school district in Ohio. Malka has a history of successfully partnering with government agencies and school districts and with nonprofit organizations to procure funding for educational initiatives. Malka's years of experience working with families struggling with the cost of private school tuition, combined with the cost of services for children with special needs, has led her to her current role at Teach Florida. As the Director of Government Programs, she oversees the execution of grants and educational initiatives for schools and families to maximize funding from state and federal programs. Lastly, Dr. Jonathan Dubkowski is a licensed clinical psychologist who has been in private practice since 2010. He specializes in the assessment and treatment of psychological disorders in older children, adolescents, and young adults. He also works with family challenges such as parenting, divorce, and other related concerns. He specializes in psychoeducational and neuropsychological assessments. So we're really honored to have such a wonderful panel here with us tonight. And we're going to open by asking David Brescher to speak about branching out and moving your career or your business over to South Florida.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I just want to touch briefly on my own experience in move to South Florida, just so you understand my background and where I'm coming from. So I'm a New Yorker, born and bred and raised my children in New York. I have always been a huge fan of South Florida, both from just an enjoyment standpoint, enjoyment of living, and also from a business standpoint. So much so that in the mid '90s, I opened up my first branch office for our mortgage company in the South Florida area, and that has actually grown quite a bit. And today we have a campus really in Hollywood, Florida, that houses several of our companies, and we provide financing for home mortgages, for commercial property, et cetera, in Florida. I was very fortunate that at my stage in life where my children, I have 4 children, thank God, and 3 are married and 1 is away in Israel. So my wife and I are sort of empty nesters, and at a younger age, and we were able to make the move on a more of a full-time basis to South Florida. I'm shuttling a little bit back and forth to New York still, but spending most of our time in Florida. So I have my perspective is a little bit different than many others who have moved with younger families. But what I will say is that we have about 20 or so employees, and many of them have moved. We have actually successfully relocated them down to South Florida from New York, and I'm very familiar with some of the challenges, and of course very familiar with many of the benefits in making that move, from looking at it through their eyes, as well as my own and my wife. And we saw a need. My wife and I saw a need in the South Florida area as communities are growing rapidly, for the involvement of an organization like an OHEL to really help solidify the community, really help those who are in need, which typically tend to remain silent. And OHEL is instrumental in being there for them, and that's something that really helps community flourish on all ends. So that's my that's just my backstory of moving to Florida and how I got into the position that we're in right now in South Florida. What I want to really talk about is a little bit more of the economic side of things, things that are practical and that you should know about in buying a home and or renting a property, and things that you should look at and consider before moving, and what it means to make a living in South Florida. So I'm just going to touch on a few items. Some of this you may be well aware of already if you're actually looking for a home or starting a business in Florida. But I'm gonna run through it relatively quickly. So on the housing front, the number one challenge today in Florida, as many who are looking for a home, is inventory. There is a minimal amount of property that is available. Property in South Florida, especially since COVID, has skyrocketed in value. Just a few years ago, about a year and a half ago, a $1 million mortgage, just the mortgage payment alone was maybe about $3,000 a month at 3%. And what that did is it caused a huge run up in pricing. Affordability went way up, and everybody kind of jumped in, that created a huge surge in pricing. Now, obviously, interest rates have changed significantly, and they're up to, let's say, around 7% today. But because many homes, because people are already locked into those low interest rates, they cannot sell their property. There was already a lack of inventory in the South Florida area, and therefore supply and demand is supply is limited while demand is still high, and that has kept pricing very, very high. And with low inventory, that does not seem to be going away anytime soon. The other major problem when it comes to housing is insurance. We all know, we've heard about it on the news, et cetera, that a lot of insurance companies have pulled out of the state of Florida. Insurance rates have skyrocketed in Florida. And in speaking to many of our clients in Florida, existing clients who maybe were even fortunate enough to purchase their home pre-COVID at a lower number and got a very low rate on their mortgage, their biggest issue today is insurance, because their mortgage is locked in. They have homestead for their taxes, but their insurance just continues to drift higher and higher. And I've spoken to many clients who have significant challenges because of the pricing on insurance. There is no immediate fix for this problem. It's something that the government really, the local government really needs to be focused on. Seems like they're not that focused on it right now as of yet, but it's certainly something that is on the forefront for all Florida residents, and it's something that you should certainly consider when you're looking for a home. It's not just about the price of the home. It's not just about your mortgage payment, but it is also, you have to be prepared for a very high insurance number, and that's a number that can also go higher as you go on for buying a home. And that also affects rents. If you're coming to Florida and you're going to be a renter, there is a lot of pressure on rents to go up because landlords are getting the same treatment on the insurance side as homeowners are. Property insurance rates are going higher by leaps and bounds. There's things like hurricanes and things like that, which are really an excuse for the insurance companies to raise their rates, because there aren't any more hurricanes today than there were, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago. But insurance companies are seizing the opportunity to grab some extra premium while most people's mortgages are low. So people have more housing, ability to spend on housing because they've gotten this stimulus from the government with these low rate mortgages. So things to consider certainly are pricing, where mortgage rates are currently, where they potentially could be heading to, and most importantly, insurance rates. The other thing I wanted to talk about is making a living in South Florida. So one thing that I have noticed is that in Florida, when it comes to moving to Florida and getting a job, a salaried position, there doesn't seem to be as much of that available in South Florida as there is, let's say, in New York, if that's where you're coming from. Additionally, the cost of living in Florida may be slightly less than it is in New York, but it's still pretty significant. Obviously, the tax that you pay is much lower because you're only paying federal tax. You're not paying state or city tax. So there's more, you can stretch your paycheck a little bit further. but I have noticed that high-paying jobs are not quite as readily available as they are in New York. And many people that, especially clients that we deal with on the mortgage end, are usually looking to be self-employed, basically bring their business from New York or start a new business or whatever the case may be. So things that you need to know about in starting a business in South Florida. So this is something that people have talked about for years, that it is difficult to hire workers in Florida. I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely 100% true. It is difficult to hire good workers in Florida. There is a little bit of a work attitude, and it's a very simple attitude, which is, if you think about it, if you're from New York, and if you think about the way people in New York work during the summertime, they take off a little bit earlier, they don't work on Fridays, things are a little bit more lax in the summertime in New York. That's how things are for 10 months out of the year in Florida. The 2 months out of the year that are different are basically July and August, when nobody is around at all. Typically, people do flee South Florida in the summertime. I know that when I come to our office in July and August, it's a little bit depressing, because the 20 or so people that we have working there, probably anywhere from 15 to maybe the entire office, takes off for the summer, or they don't take off, but they go somewhere else in the summer. Some come back to New York and into the country. I have 2 people that went to Israel this year. We had 1 person went to Colorado for the summer. It's hot, so people do take off. So just so you understand, hiring is a little bit of a challenge. The seasons are a bit of a challenge, and it's not as easy to hire. So if you have a business, if you're starting a business that is reliant on human resources, on employees, it's something that you need to think about, and it's something that you really need to work hard. We have, like I said, we have about 20 or so employees. Some of them we brought down from New York. Some of them are local to South Florida, and we have to vet them out very, very carefully. And you want to really try to create a scenario where they are, very, very much engaged, and work hard for what you're paying them. That's critical. Obviously, we know today that there's remote work and things like that, so that could potentially either be a solution or a challenge to you in running a business out of South Florida, depending on the type of business. But these are some of the things that you should be thoughtful of. In our particular business, in the mortgage side, on the residential mortgage side, there's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of regulatory, and there's a lot of interaction with government agencies, banking departments, and things like that. And we're licensed in 25 states. I can tell you unequivocally, the easiest state, or the most accommodating state to work with, is Florida. When it comes to dealing with the government, when it comes to dealing with things like government grants, government agencies, licensing, things of that nature, it's not only that they are easy to deal with, but they are highly efficient for whatever reason. So just comparatively, to get a mortgage license for an individual in Florida could take you about maybe 5 days to a week. In New York, it could take you 3 to 4 months at best. So that just gives you a little bit of a indication of what you're dealing with there. So obviously, from my perspective, living in Florida is amazing. It's great. It's actually a privilege. And being able to run a business and being successful in Florida, while it has its challenges, there are certainly many benefits, and there are certainly certain negatives that you have to be prepared for before you open up shop in Florida. And as far as on the job side, if you have a good attitude and you are a hard worker, like I said before, those are not easy things to find in South Florida. That is your value, and that is how you can distinguish yourself for top pay. So that's pretty much a brief overview of doing business in the state of Florida, and certain things that you should be looking at. And I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Malka, if you could talk to us a little bit about education funding, grants, and all things in that area.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bracha and Carly, for inviting me. I know when I moved in 2018, I would have loved to participate in a webinar just like this. Although the scholarships were not what they are today, there's a lot here about business and social emotional that I could have benefited from. So thank you for hosting. But in 2023, we are looking at a very different landscape. I am very fortunate to work for Teach Florida, the advocacy arm of the Orthodox Union. We're the leading advocacy group in Florida that advocates for our yeshivos, for our day schools, to make sure that we are injecting as much state and federal funding into our schools to make it quality Jewish education affordable and accessible. And there's a lot to be grateful for in Florida today. In March, the Universal School Choice Bill was passed, HB1, and universal really means universal. So people ask me this all the time. There are two main scholarships in Florida. One is the private school scholarship, which is now universal. So I joke that if Elon Musk were to move his family here today and send his child to a private school, he would qualify for the voucher, which not a voucher anymore, the scholarship. It's a close to $8,000 scholarship. And if your child attends an eligible private school, you can access the scholarship. Your child does have to be school age. So your child does have to be 5 by September 1st entering kindergarten or 6 by September 1st entering first grade. So that cutoff is very critical. Don't start your child early. We do have to follow that, and it's better if your child's a little bit older so that you can access that scholarship. Most schools that you're thinking of perhaps are looking into right now, they are compliant with the state compliance and they are eligible to receive the scholarship. I work with 47 schools in South Florida. And while some of our new schools are working through compliance, most of the established schools already are accepting the scholarships. So that's our first opportunity. The state scholarships are the largest grant that we have and we can partake in. And there's also for our students with unique abilities, children who have some kind of exceptionality, there's also funding, and it's at a higher amount, close to $10,000 per child. And for children with more severe disability, there's even scholarships between $22,000 and $35,000. So it's pretty incredible the amount of funding the state has put into these programs. There are other programs as well for children with disabilities that Teach Florida is taking a lead on. There's IDEA funding for children to get evaluated and to get eligibility and services in their private schools. I know this is not something new to people coming from New York and New Jersey, but it is new to Florida, unfortunately. For over a decade, our children were not getting these services. So we're all in at Teach Florida. We're doing an initiative called Services for All. We don't want our children to not get the services they're entitled to. And we really want to see that they not only tap into scholarships, but they also get the services so that not everything is out of pocket. That does help keep tuition costs down if we can inject, like I say, as much money into our schools and institutions. The other amazing thing about having these scholarships is that new schools open up and they know that there's guaranteed funding. So we are seeing many new schools opening up, which is good for competition to keep our costs down so that we can make sure that we're all about school choice. We want you to be able to choose the institution that's right for you and for your child. There's a lot of nitty-gritty stuff, but at our heart, we're an advocacy organization. So we do a lot of get out the vote, getting you involved in the work that we do so that we can continue to support legislation and support policies that help our yeshivos and our children with disabilities. So I welcome any kind of question. We do so much around scholarships that people often think my last name is Scholarship, or just send me emails that just says Scholarship. But please feel free, to reach out with any specific questions. And there's other types of funding as well. There's Jewish Day School security grants, because at the core of it also is safety. We want to make sure that our institutions are safe for your children.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear about all these opportunities and real concrete ways that education is becoming so much more affordable and accessible for all families in Florida. Thank you, Malka. And now we're going to turn it over to Dr. Dubkowski, a wonderful child and adolescent psychologist who can really talk to us a little bit about the helping ease children into the adjustment when they move to Florida, and turning it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Namdar. I want to start by saying, I've thankfully had the opportunity to be a part of other lecture series and a few webinars. But usually I'm excited just to be a panelist, but tonight hearing from David and from Malka, I'm equally excited to be a attendee. So truthfully, I'm filling both roles. There's a lot of information there that I'm learning tonight and is really invaluable. So I'm sure this is obviously being recorded, and this is such crucial information that's going to hopefully be disseminated to people across the country who are thinking about contemplating moving to Florida. To be honest, I moved here 14 years ago thinking I was going to be here for 1 year. I came here to do my postdoctorate following my doctoral program in New York. And 14 years later, I'm still here. So what that says is this community, the greater South Florida community, has a lot to offer. But as Dr. Namdar introduced, my brief discussion, there are a lot of very important things that we need to think about when moving with our families. And the truth is, I think perhaps it was advertised as advice for helping our children, our teenagers adapt. But the truth is, this is, I think, important information for anybody of any age. I think I would have benefited from this webinar, as I said, prior to moving, and hopefully anybody that's listening can really integrate some of this information for themselves, not only for their children. Of course, we need to understand and appreciate that moving to a new place, moving to a new community, it's potentially, one of the most stress-producing experiences that a family will encounter. There's positive stress in life, and there's more challenging stress in life. And of course, it's especially challenging for our children and our adolescents. And I think the more that we are mindful and aware of these potential challenges, like anything in life, we it's important not to avoid, not to shy away from challenges, but we need to become knowledgeable. And the more knowledgeable we are, the better we, and more equipped we can be to combat some of these challenges. On a more basic level, moves interrupt friendships, moves interrupt stability and structure that we all thrive on, that we all depend on. We live very predictable, hopefully very predictable, very structured, very consistent lives. And when we move with our families, inevitably, it's disruptive, and we have to understand that it's going to be disruptive. And for a child, especially for an adolescent, especially moving to a new school, into a new community, and needing to adapt and integrate rather quickly is a daunting task. We have to understand that the standards, I think, as David alluded to in the workforce, the standards and on a basic level, the curriculum, the culture that South Florida has is going to be very different than where you're coming from. And that's true regardless of whether you're coming from New York or from Israel or from Detroit or from Chicago or from LA. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. This is a different culture. And as a result, one has to learn to adapt to this new culture. When I first started my practice many years ago, when I would talk about moving with patients, with parents, it was really one place and one place only. And that was, how do I get my children to accept the fact that we're moving to Israel, that we're making Aliyah? I can honestly say 14 years later, thankfully, those conversations are still happening. However, many of my conversations are exactly on this very topic. How can I get my children to adapt to the fact that they're living in a new place, and it's difficult and it's hard? And I always start by saying, the adversity and challenge is probably the most important thing that that children and adolescents and adults can go through in life, as long as it's healthy adversity and healthy challenge. And I think relocating, hopefully for the right reasons. Unfortunately, sometimes we're forced to relocate for more difficult reasons that are out of our control. But the most important thing that I can impress upon upon the attendees, tonight, is the importance of talking to your children, talking to your family about what the move will be like and what challenges might occur during this process. I can't tell you how many times I had parents in my office say to me, I'm gonna, I'd rather not tell my kids till the very, very end that we're making Aliyah, right? And I understood where they were coming from. I understood what their intentions, their motivations were. But at the core of it was that they were scared to have a conversation with their children about something that may or may not be challenging. And I tried to the best of my ability to normalize for them the importance of these conversations and how critical these conversations are. And so the goal is to problem solve in advance. I think Dr. Namdar and Bracha will acknowledge the fact that one of the goals of this webinar, to learn from David, to learn from Malka, and hopefully to learn a little bit from myself, is to problem solve in advance, right? Is to hopefully troubleshoot some of the challenges. Some of them are out of our control and will happen regardless of how much we prepare. And I'll just make one additional point, and I know there's going to be some questions. I think children and adolescents benefit from being involved in the relocation process, making them feel in control at a time when these important events are seemingly out of their control is extremely important. One of the primary challenges that I see in children when they move for the first time is they feel that they've lost control of their environment. They don't have the same friends, they don't have that same comfort level. And now we want to bring a little bit more control and a little bit more stability to their life during a time when there's not control. So getting them involved in this process achieves, albeit on a small level, that goal. So you want to discuss with them very openly, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? What are they worried about? What are they scared about? And finally, what are you worried about? What are you scared about? See, as parents, as adults, we like to pretend that we don't have fears, that we don't have our own insecurities or anxieties. And the more that you can be honest with your children and your adolescents and your spouses about what you're scared of, about what you're fearful of, and what you're excited about, the better it is for this process to go more smoothly. So once again, I want to thank profusely Dr. Namdar and Bracha for putting together this panel. And I'm really going to sit back, obviously answer the questions that are addressed to me, but really gain tremendously from David's insights and from Malka's insights.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That was wonderful. Just for everybody watching, you're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do the best that we can to answer any questions that come in. So we have a question that's just come in, and I'm going to address it to David Brescher. David, everyone understands that the economy is really going through some difficult times. What are your thoughts about someone who's planning on moving to Florida but is holding off due to the economy?
Well, we have to also understand one thing that's very, very important, and that is that Florida really has a different economy than really the rest of the country. New York, let's say, has specific problems in many industries. Florida has certain problems in certain industries and certain advantages in certain industries. I think if you're looking to push off a move to Florida because of home price affordability, let's say, prices could certainly go down. There can certainly be some type of a drop in home prices, but whatever, you're not going to remember in 20 years or 30 years when you sell your home if you could have bought it for, let's say, $750, or you could have gotten it for $700 if there was a little bit of a steeper price that you possibly could have gotten because pricing went down. If you can afford the home, if you can afford the payments on the home, and if you can afford, buying the home, and you could find the home, you should buy it if you want to move to Florida for the right reasons. If you're looking to move to Florida because of opportunity that you think is in Florida that may not exist in other parts of the country, things like real estate and the like, you really have to look at that very, very carefully and understand the differential between Florida and the rest of the country. Literally, Florida has its own set of rules, and it's not that uncommon or unusual, because we know that where I come from in New York is different, just like California is different, and just like Las Vegas is different. Different areas have different issues that you really have to think about. But overall, if you're moving for the right reasons, for the benefit of your children, for family or whatever, there's nothing rotten going on in Florida that you need to be concerned about. And if anything, chances are things are usually pretty good in South Florida.
Thank you for that. Malka, if it's okay with you, I'm going to just address a question that's just come into you as well. Does universal scholarship really mean anybody? Can everyone really access the scholarship? Will the state run out of funding? And, if a family moves to Florida, let's say a family moved to Florida in August of this past year, how long would it take for them to be able to access that funding? And how do they go about it?
All great questions. So I'll start, I think I'll start with the first part, which is universal really universal? It is, as long as you attend eligible private school and your child is the right age. There is one component of the private school scholarship I didn't touch on. There is a homeschool option called PEP, Personalized Education Program. And then you can use the scholarship for educational materials, supplies, equipment. So there are other, again, school choices about really educating your child in the atmosphere that is best for your child. So in the past, you really didn't have that option unless your child had a disability. So that's another aspect. And it really is universal in terms of funding, because that's a question I get all the time. There is more funding than there are seats in private school. Once I knew that, I could breathe a sigh of relief. We can all apply. In terms of timing, I will say this has been, honestly, the most challenging enrollment season, because Step Up, which is our primary scholarship funding organization that processes applications, they decided to create a new portal to have more bandwidth for applications a year before this bill passed for universal school choice. So they had to go in and make changes in the system, which really disrupted the system. And I can't tell you, there are still many people who are outstanding and waiting for their scholarship. I will say, if anybody is still having issues, we are still working in partnership very closely with Step Up. They keep on giving us additional teams to work with. Right now, working with an exceptional team who's really been pushing these scholarships through. In terms of the timing, I would say if you have your documentation together, there are checklists that I can provide that give very specifics on what you need, but it's normally a processing time now about 2 to 4 weeks. Before, in the beginning of the season, I would say 4 to 6 weeks of processing. And there is, you do have to confirm enrollment, and you do have to submit the award ID to the school. I can't say it's the easiest process and that it doesn't take some time, but it is important to learn the process, because while you don't have to requalify every year, it's once and always in, you do have to reapply every year. So learning the process is important, but there is enough money, and the money is coming any day now. Some of the money came in last week, and the week before, but September 15th is really when they're going to see a lot more of the money coming through. And I did provide to you and to Bracha the award charts. I think people really want to see the amounts of funding that they would be eligible for. Was that all the question and all the components?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. We just had another question that just came in. Are non-Florida residents or non-US citizens eligible for the universal funding?
Okay, so non-Florida residents, no. And this becomes a question a lot of people ask me about: children that go away to school. A child who is out of state does not generate funding. They put it as an option on the application because they think perhaps that child might return, so then you can generate money. But if you're living and you're a resident of Florida, your child is out of state, In Chicago, your child cannot generate money. It is only for Florida residents, children that are residents. But if you are a non-citizen, we have many people on visas, or you can actually apply for, if you have an ITIN number, you can get the state funding. If you don't have an ITIN money number, there is money that comes through tax credits, Florida tax credits, and that you can access the tax credit money for the private school scholarship. And yes, without being a without having a visa.
Just one last question that just came in is, till when can you apply for Step Up for this year?
Okay, so normally they keep the applications open even through December. However, you do get prorated. There is a deadline coming up of September 30th. If your child's not enrolled, if you are doing the private school option, they're not enrolled in the school, you haven't approved enrollment by September 30th, you can be prorated and get 75% of the scholarship. However, if you're experiencing IT issues, we will continue to advocate for you to receive the full funding. So keep up with us if you are experiencing those issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Dubkowski, I've got a question here for you. Parents who, very excited about making the move, but how do they deal with the child that doesn't want to make the move? How does the parent help their child make that transition?
Yes, and just to, speak to my point earlier about how I'm benefiting from this as much as I am part of the panelist. I have a child who goes to school in Chicago who is not getting the benefit of the scholarship. So I was hoping Malka would give a different response, but unfortunately, that is how it goes. So, yeah, I mean, such an important question, and I think part of the answer was what it was. What I alluded to earlier, which is, again, you want to allow your child to experience his or her level of worry or uncertainty. Like anything, all beginnings are challenging, and so you want to validate and acknowledge for that child or for that adolescent that this is difficult, this is hard. It's very, very important, I think, for it starts with the parents, right? If a parent is modeling for their child, and this is true for anything, but if the parent is modeling for their child stress and anxiety and guilt and frustration and worry, that's certainly going to be passed along to their children. But if they're acknowledging and validating for their children the fact that this is also hard, right? And we're going to go through this process collaboratively and jointly and deal with it together and get the support that we need. I think it will be received a little bit differently. On a very pragmatic level, bringing a child to their new community, in this case, Florida, prior to the move. Again, if it has to be done somewhat abruptly, so then it's unavoidable. But any exposure that you can give to a child ahead of time to the school, to the community, where they can just develop a comfort level, even a baseline comfort level, can go a long way in easing that transition. And I think piggybacking on what David said earlier, I think one of the great things about South Florida, certainly in the last 10 years, is the advancement in terms of variety in our communities. I think when I was coming to South Florida as a child, I hope I'm not offending anybody who's on this webinar, Miami Beach was the only city we ever heard of. There was nothing else in Florida but Miami Beach. I can proudly say, and I'm going to leave some out just because I'm not familiar with them myself, but Boca, Hollywood, North Miami Beach, Aventura, Bell Harbor, Miami Beach, and many other communities are thriving, and their schools are thriving. And and if you want a large school, you can find your large school. If you want your smaller school, you can find your smaller school. If you want all different types of schools that can hopefully best cater to your child. And that's very, very important. So while, 10, 15 years ago, we were much more limited in the options that we had, I think there's greater variety, and that can ease the transition process.
Great, thank you. Yes, we definitely, it's been incredible to see the growth of so many different Florida schools and the variety that parents have access to. And thank you for that, Dr. Dubkowski. David, I have a question for you. We've heard that some people live in LA, some people live in New York, some people live in Chicago, and then they come down and do some business in South Florida. Should people move to Florida, or should people and do business, or should it be in reverse?
Well, I mean, you're asking me, do you need to be in Florida to do business in Florida? Is that the question?
Something along those lines. What would you recommend?
Right. So there are certain, you could do business in Florida without living in Florida. There's no question about it. But Florida, like I was saying earlier, has a lot of unique attributes to it. So we do a lot of business in Florida. I would say probably 75% of the business that we do in Florida is generated from our offices that are not in Florida. We have 12 offices. One of them is in Florida, but 75% of the business is generated outside of Florida. Now, because we opened up in Florida, we do generate more business being there and being boots on the ground. I think that things are changing in that regard. I think that because of all of the communities that have opened up, and because they are becoming, the migration to Florida is real, and we are now starting to deal with people who are born and bred in Florida. I think being there, being part integrated within the community, if you're in a services-based business, is starting to become more and more important. Previously, like currently and previously, when someone is moving, let's say from New York or Chicago, wherever, and they're moving down to Florida, they're happy getting their services from a company that is in New York or Chicago or wherever for Florida. Obviously, there are certain physical types of businesses that need to be there, but certain types of services, whether it's insurance, finance, whatever it may be, they are comfortable getting it where they were previously for Florida. But now that communities are starting to become real and people are, there's a huge real physical social network, whether it's in the schools or wherever the case may be, I find that that is a tremendous enhancement. So if you're in a services-based business and you're a people person, Florida is a great, you should be in Florida. If you're a service provider that's not physical, or you don't have to be in Florida, that's something else. If you're in manufacturing and things like that, then there's other things to consider there. But Florida is becoming real as far as the social fabric and as far as those neighborhoods are concerned. So if you're looking to do services-based type business, not a bad idea to be boots on the ground and be physically present in Florida.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, Malka, we're going to turn it over to you. I actually was on flying recently and met a Jewish family whose children were in public school, and just happened to meet them and sit with them on the plane. And they let me know that their children are transferring over to a Jewish day school now with this new funding. So you must be seeing a lot of that starting to happen, which is really, really wonderful to hear. But I wanted to ask you about how do scholarships impact tuition prices? Because they seem to be higher in South Florida than in other states. So if you could just speak to that a little bit, that would be really helpful for parents.
Absolutely. And I will say my favorite calls are from public school families. We have schools that have opened up to cater to public school families making the transition. So it's really an incredible, incredible time to be in South Florida in terms of Jewish education. That is the second most common, besides for when am I getting my scholarship, is how will this impact tuition and prices? Because we are all about, that's what we fight for, is affordability. There is a misconception. I will say, I looked at some of the data. The Heritage Foundation just recently released a study that showed that in states where school choice and scholarships are a big part of the culture and the political scene, the tuition prices actually increased slower, only 15% compared to other states at 28%. And it was not what I expected, because it did feel like prices went up recently. And I think there is that misconception that went up at the same time as universal school choice happened, but actually it happened before. School choice, the bill wasn't passed until March, but we were starting to see the increases because of teacher shortages, because of inflationary costs, that there was an increase, but nothing to the level of other states that don't have school choice. And actually, the study showed that eventually the tuition prices went down. So it's not to say that there are yeshivos in other states that have a very low price tag. And when they come here, there is a sticker shock saying, wait 1 second, we're expected to pay full price. However, there are internal scholarships. It is really school by school. And I always tell parents, advocate for yourself. This money is guaranteed from the state. Whereas when you're making a negotiation and you're doing a contract based on your salary, that could change. You could lose your job. Your hours could be cut. This is guaranteed money. Advocate for yourself. And there are the internal scholarships. So again, we are seeing increases across the country, unfortunately, because of, I think, the teacher shortage is everywhere, and inflation obviously is a big critical factor. But at the core, again, some of the other programs and some of the other funding we want to bring into our schools and our communities is hopefully going to bring the cost down. And also the opening of new schools, that business model of competition, that's also the hope that it will bring the tuition costs down.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you one other question that just came in. If I have a child with exceptionalities, a neurodiverse learner, or whichever needs my child might have, what services are available? And, a lot of New York people are used to a huge host of services being readily available to them. If you could just talk to that a little bit, and what funding or what other funding can families tap into to really support their child with needs?
Yep, this is a very good question. I'm very honest when people call me and they tell me all about the grab bag of goodies they have in other states. So I'm very honest when it comes to severe disabilities. Like I said, there is additional funding at the state level. Then there's federal money that we've been tapping into as well, and really trying to access more of, to bring services that are no cost to the school or to families. There are also agencies. The Federation in Palm Beach does excellent work giving money towards services that parents could tap into. But it is still something that we're working on, because it's, there is CMS, Medicaid. There are some services that your child can get. However, it's not what you've gotten in New York or New Jersey or some of our other states in the North. So it is something, when I have a really honest conversation when people share with me, because like I say, there are some local funds, there are some generous donors, there are some grants within some of our schools that are, again, school by school. But do I think we're really up to par? No, I think there's a lot more work to be done. I'm partnering with anybody that I can on this work, but there's a lot more that we need to be doing in Florida. And I'll be honest with you, if you call me, whether or not we really do have the funds, and there's certain counties you might want to consider over other counties because of local funding as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dubkowski. And a question just came in. Any pointers, or perhaps maybe you can speak from your personal experience and the host of other people that you've encountered, any advice on how to really help a family integrate into a new community?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, I have a child who is currently studying out of state, and I'm trying to guide him in terms of what he can do to better integrate into his community. So I think probably the first piece of advice that I can advise is, I think it's incumbent, as hard as it may be for families who are just moving to a new place where they're overwhelmed by their new job, their new profession, their new home, and et cetera. It's so important for the parents to get dirty and invest in their new community and become very proactive in the community, in the school, because the more that children see, and their shul and their synagogue, the more that children see their parents getting involved and getting dirty, as I mentioned, I think it sends a very, very powerful message. That question, Dr. Namdar, I think is different for for varying ages, right? So I'd say for older children who I'll be honest, I think living in New York, let's just compare New York to Florida for a moment. It's a much busier life, right? There's just so much going on. Here in Florida, things tend to move a bit slower, and so I think getting kids involved in as much extracurricular as we can offer, and school-related activities is imperative, because I think there's a level of of interest in some of the New York schools when it comes to this point that probably we're not necessarily at that point here. And so if you can get kids involved in like I said, school-related activities, and it doesn't only have to be sports, right? There's so many different different things that schools offer. I think that's a great way to build social confidence, to build individual confidence, personal confidence, etc. I think there's, in my experience, communities are doing a far better job of integrating new families as a whole. I've seen it, I've spoken about it, and I've seen it personally. So I think the shuls and schools are really, really going out of their comfort zone in helping families integrate. So in sum, I think it's about getting out of your comfort zone. And I think the more active or proactive we can be, the more assertive we can be, the more effective we'll be for our children.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists here tonight. Really gone above and beyond to offer your advice, your pointers, your experience, and share it with us all here tonight. We really, really hope that this has been helpful to everybody that's on, and a recording of this will be available. Will be up on OHEL's website, probably in about a day or so. And we are happy to continue to support you in Florida, and wishing everybody a happy Jewish New Year for those who are celebrating, and wishing everyone the best of luck and a really wonderful school year. Happy and healthy year for everyone. Thank you, everyone.